Now, the William and Naomi Gorowitz Institute on Terrorism and Extremism advances the fight against terrorism through education and advocacy by providing information and cutting-edge training to law enforcement. And as you've heard me say before, there is perhaps no work that I am more proud of here at ADL than the continued support that we provide to the men and women who protect our communities every single day. And before terrorism was a household word in our country, before it had changed the skyline of New York, before it set its sights on our shores and targeted our communities, Alan Gary, longtime ADL supporter, had the foresight to help our agency increase our capabilities in providing expertise on terrorists and extremists to law enforcement so they could be better equipped at protecting people throughout our nation. And as you know, a major component of our tradition of Judaism is passing the baton and ensuring there's continuity in our faith, l'dor v'dor, from generation to generation, to keep those spirits alive and to make sure those values are eternal. The William and Naomi Gorowitz Institute was named to honor Alan Gary's late parents. Mr. Gary has often attended these presentations, but this year we're particularly pleased to have the honor of being joined by William and Naomi's grandson and Alan's son, Adam. Adam, please come up, if you will, to the stage and join me for the presentation. Now, welcome, Adam. Thank you for being here. You stand right here. So, as you can see in the brochures in front of you on the table, the Gorowitz Award is incredibly important to ADL, and it has given us the privilege, the opportunity to recognize some of the most important people in law enforcement in this country. Its ranks include former commissioners of the NYPD, former heads of the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the Department of Homeland Security. And it is a great privilege to welcome Jay Johnson into that esteemed fraternity. The Honorable Jay Johnson served, frankly, alongside me when I also served in the Obama administration, although I think we were in different parts of the building, so to speak. But he served with great distinction as the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security from December 2013 to January 2017, where he was responsible for some of the most important issues in the national security portfolio of this country, including counterterrorism, cybersecurity, border, port, aviation, and maritime security, enforcement and administration of this nation's immigration laws, and the response to natural disasters. ADL is extremely proud of our work with DHS. For the past 7 years, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, DHS's largest investigative agency, has been sending senior personnel through ADL's Law Enforcement and Society Training Program, led by the terrific David Friedman, who's here with us this morning. And it has trained over 130,000 law enforcement professionals throughout this country. Prior to DHS, Secretary Johnson served as General Counsel of the Department of Defense, where he was a primary legal architect for the military's counterterrorism missions in the Obama administration, and he co-authored the 2010 report that paved the way for the important repeal of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell law by Congress. It is an honor, and really I'm humbled to have the opportunity to present the 2017 William and Naomi Gorowitz Institute of Service Award to Secretary Jay Johnson. Thank you. I'll hold on to that for you.
Thank you very much. As I stand here at this event for the Anti-Defamation League, my thoughts turn to a former colleague of mine at my law firm, Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison, a man whose name you probably have not heard in a while, Morris Abram. Morris Abram was one of my mentors at Paul Weiss. I've been at Paul Weiss 5 separate times. I've been through the revolving door of public service 4 times. I'm like a bad penny at Paul Weiss, but my first day at Paul Weiss was November 12th, 1984. And the first phone call I got from any other lawyer at Paul Weiss when I got there was from Morris Abram, who at the time was a partner at Paul Weiss. He was a trustee of my alma mater, Morehouse College in Atlanta. And as some of you may know, Morris was a great civil rights lawyer. Before he became a corporate lawyer in New York, he was affiliated with ADL's Southern Regional Office in the 1940s and 1950s, fighting anti-Semitism and discrimination. Morris knew that racism and anti-Semitism are merely 2 different shades of the same evil. He went on to be one of my mentors and helped me become the first black partner at Paul Weiss. If you do research and you look back at past editions of the Wall Street Journal, you'll see a front page story from April 1998 entitled, "New Black-Jewish Partnership Begins to Emerge at Law Firms," which highlighted the relationship and the mentorship of Morris Abram, by Morris Abram of me. So I want to tell you a little story. When I was Secretary of Homeland Security for 1,124 days, one of our big initiatives, given the current threat environment in which we live here in the homeland, in which we have to deal with homegrown, homeborn violent extremism, one of our big initiatives, which I did alongside George Salim, who is sitting right here, of the DHS Office of Community Partnerships, was to reach out to communities across this homeland in which ISIL and Al-Qaeda seek to recruit. And so in the course of 37 months, I probably traveled to every single major metropolitan area that had a significant American Muslim population. We'd have these engagements to build bridges to American Muslim communities, to ask them to help us in our homeland security efforts. And in these engagements, it was almost always the case that a priest and a rabbi was with us, because they understood, as you heard here a little while ago, that discrimination against one is discrimination against all. Then came the terrorist attack in San Bernardino, December 2nd, 2015. And I had been to a mosque in Northern Virginia called the Adams Center. It's the second biggest mosque in the United States, it turns out. It was one of the more memorable engagements I had. There was a Boy Scout troop, a Girl Scout troop. We began the engagement by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. And I said to George right after the attack in San Bernardino, we've got to go back to that mosque and do a press event to stand with the Muslim community in Northern Virginia to denounce terrorism and to denounce what happened there. That was Tuesday, December 7th, 2015, late afternoon. I said in my remarks, alongside members of this community, the answer in Homeland Security is to build bridges, not to vilify certain communities and drive them into the shadows. At the end of the press event, reporters began to ask me, what about the comments that Mr. Trump just made, in which he announced he wanted to ban Muslims from this country? What do you have to say about that? And it turned out Donald Trump had given his statement the very same hour I was at this mosque. And I didn't know what the reporters were talking about. And I had not, up until that point, commented on anything our presidential candidates had said while I was in office. And when I was asked this, I thought to myself, well, I can't believe he said that. And as I walked off the stage, I'll never forget, a little boy said into my ear, and I think he was a Boy Scout, aren't you going to denounce what he said? The next day, I was due to be on Andrea Mitchell, MSNBC, for an interview. And I called her in advance and I said, Andrea, I want you to ask me about this. And I decided that I had to speak out and say that when a major figure, a presidential candidate, calls for banning people from this country based on their religion, the rest of us in public office have to say something, that this is counter to our national security, it's counter to our homeland security, and it's counter to who we are as a country that celebrates diversity and celebrates our immigrant heritage. Over 3 years, I came to believe that homeland security was a balance between our basic physical security and preserving the things that we cherish and we celebrate in this country: the freedom to travel, the freedom to associate, the freedom of religion, our diversity, our immigrant heritage. I used to tell audiences, I can build you a perfectly safe commercial flight, but you wouldn't want to take that flight because you'd be wearing no clothes, you'd have no checked luggage, no carry-on, you wouldn't be allowed to leave your seat, there'd be no food, and you'd be miserable. And I could build you a perfectly safe hotel, a perfectly safe city, but it would look like a prison. In this country, those of us in homeland security and in national security are the guardians of your physical security, but we're also the guardians of preserving the civil liberties that make this country great, to strike that balance. Leaders must resist the temptation to engage in fear-mongering. Leaders must have the confidence in the American people to know that we hear them when they talk about our threats without screaming at them and frightening them. When you do that, innocent people get hurt. We know this from our own history. Innocent people get hurt in a climate of fear and anxiety. The McCarthy era, the 1940s, and the 1950s. I am the former Secretary of Homeland Security. You're looking at someone whose grandfather, who was a PhD in sociology in the 1940s, who wrote about civil rights, had to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee to deny he was a member of the Communist Party. My own grandfather. Innocent people get hurt when we engage in fear-mongering and we appeal to fear and prejudice and suspicion. So, in my view, leaders must lead not by making people afraid of the darkness, but by offering a candle. We must remember that the root of the word terrorism is terror, defined as fright, alarm, panic. I would tell audiences all the time, and as recently as several weeks ago, when a JCC in Bergen County, New Jersey, my home state, when I heard that they were keeping people home, keeping kids home from school, that terrorism cannot prevail if we refuse to be terrorized. So, thank you very much for this award. Thank you. I'm honored to accept it. All of you here, continue to engage your elected representatives here in Washington. Thank you.